He served in Congress representing the state for more than 4 decades.
Well, today, former Senator Thad Cochran is being remembered for his fight to bring dollars to Mississippi for education, infrastructure, health care, hurricane recovery, and much more.
3 News Side's Rosalind Anderson has that story.
He led with quiet conviction, guided by principle rather than applause.
A tribute to former U.S. Senator Thad Cochran told the story of the nation's second longest-serving congressman at the 2 Mississippi museums. The life and legacy of Thad Cochran shared the accomplishments of the first Republican senator in Mississippi. He was first voted U.S. representative, then elected to the U.S. Senate until his retirement in 2018. As Senate Appropriations Chair, the conservative pushed legislation to benefit the state.
One of the newspapers in Washington called Thad the quiet persuader. We need to have more like him. Anybody in the United States Senator from Mississippi couldn't have a better roadmap than to see what Thad Cochran did.
Staff members and appointees comprised a panel discussing his contributions. Former U.S. Marshal and former WLBT Public Affairs Director Nehemiah Flowers was hired by Cochran as the first African-American staff member on the Hill.
These are things that the Democratic senator had not done. These are senators that had voted against the Civil Rights Bill. And here's a Republican senator that was going to Jackson State Alcorn games.
Cochran served 45 years in Washington. He died in 2019 at the age of 81.
He never forgot that public service at its core is about people.
In Jackson, Rosalind Anderson, 3 on your side.